we went from 90 FPS all the way to 45 just by getting closer to that MPC. Check it out. That's crazy. We went from 130 FPS to 35 FPS with this smoke effect. And the GPU is pulling 520 watts. Wow. Hi guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to take a look at the Starfield's newest expansion, Shattered Space, on an RTX 4090 Ryzen 7800 XRD, so pretty high-end build. And I'm actually going to document my experience. I played for quite a bit, looked at a few different areas and scenarios, and I found some strange performance issues, so I wanted to point that all out, make some comparisons, take a look at some DLSS, frame generation, all that stuff. And yeah, let's see how it goes. Let's jump over to the settings real quick. For this video, we're going to focus on 4K, as you would expect. And for starters, I wanted to begin with native 4K and all the graphical settings maxed out. No upscaling, no frame generation. The Shattered Space expansion begins with you getting a distress beacon, which has you responding to a space station in distress, and once you go inside, you find out that things have gone wrong. I mean, it's a ghost town at first. Now, if you look at the performance, getting pretty good, right? 100 to 90 FPS. The first sign of trouble for me was encountering these NPCs for the very first time. They're like ghosts or ethereal type of NPCs. And look at the FPS. It's dropped all the way down to the 70s when you're looking at them.
No, I will not leave you here.
Now, shortly after, the female NPC becomes hostile, which, of course, I had to shoot her down. But check this out. We're getting 90 FPS, which is what we're getting before. And when you get close to this NPC here, it drops all the way into the 40s. Now, this was the first time I picked up on something going wrong, because going from 90 to 70 or 60, it's not really that big of a drop. But going into the mid 40s, I was like, what is going on? So apparently when you get really close to these ethereal NPCs, for some reason the frame rate drops. So it must be some transparency effect that causes this. Now, for the rest of this video, I ended up removing the 1% lows from the metrics just because when you go in and out of menus, it causes a hitch and a frame rate change, so it wouldn't really be that accurate. But you can look at the frame time graph for the fluidity. But back to what we're testing here. You're not going to necessarily go right up against those NPCs by choice, but what happens is, as you're making your way throughout this space station, these NPCs can like spawn directly above you. They sort of teleport in and out, some of them, and that will cause the frame rate to drop. Now here we didn't see as big of a drop as we did at the very beginning, where it went to the 40s, but it does happen. And even if you don't have the frame rate counter up, I mean, you can feel that shift from 100 FPS all the way down to 60 or 70, whatever it might be. Another thing that I noticed though was that if you use a magnifying scope weapon and zoom in to shoot these enemies, it can actually cause the frame rate to drop a little bit sometimes, although it's not nearly as bad.
I cannot wait to kill you.
98 or 99% of the time though, you're just going to be fighting them from a distance, and you know, it's usually all right. I mean, I thought here the performance was, for the most part, pretty good. I mean, we average around 90 to 100 FPS at native 4K with the ultra graphical preset. I thought it was pretty good, but the game had a few more surprises for me, so let's go ahead and drop down into the expansion's new planet. Now, I'm going to do my best to not show any story spoilers or anything like that, but once you finish the space station, you land at Varun Kai, which is the planet of House Varun, as I understand it, which is the religious order that worships the Great Serpent. The expansion takes place around this. Now, once you land, it's a bunch of conversations and talking to NPCs, you know, the usual Bethesda stuff. It can get quite long, but what we can take away is that we drop in performance a little bit down here. We're still at native 4K Ultra, where we were averaging 90 to 100 FPS up on the space station. Down here, we're at around 76. I guess that's kind of understandable. But what wasn't understandable was this next part.
Open the gate.
Now, shortly after your arrival into the city, you have to go through this trial, right? And it takes place in this series of caves. And as you can see, in caves, we're getting insane performance, right? We're at 120, 130 FPS. Makes sense. What didn't make sense, though, and what shocked me was this next part. So this area is filled with smoke, and there's some type of, I don't know, like hallucination type of things happening here. Look at the FPS, guys. It begins to drop from 130 before this smoking effect kicked on, and it drops all the way into the 40s, and even worse, into the 30s. With my 4090 pulling 520 watts. I've never actually seen my 4090 pull that much power before. I was beginning to get concerned. Now this part of the quest, though, is only like 2 minutes long, if even that. But I wanted to get to the bottom of it. So if we were to enable DLSS to quality, we go from 35 pretty close to 60. But is there an actual setting that can give us even more performance that controls this effect? So I dove into it, and yes, it's particles quality. So if you drop particles quality to low, you can actually go from like 40 FPS all the way to 75 FPS, which is pretty cool. And I don't really even notice a visual difference, really. But medium and high are equally costly, very costly. But I wanted to compare the two anyway, guys. We have high particle quality on the left and low particle quality on the right. And right away you can see the difference in performance is crazy. But the difference in visual fidelity, though, it's, I don't know, they both look very similar to me. And this game has other particle quality effects as well that can tank your FPS. So I would probably suggest just leaving it at low anyway. I think I'm gonna. So yeah, but let's move on. Let's check out the city. Okay, so this here is the main city of the expansion. Well, I shouldn't call it a city. It's more like a settlement, right? If you played Starfield, you know. But here I wanted to test DLAA, DLSS, frame generation, all that stuff, because it's a controlled environment. So what I did was I did a lap going all the way to the end and back. And at native 4K Ultra, which is what we're running at right now, we ended up averaging 84 FPS. Next, I wanted to try DLAA because DLAA can improve the anti-aliasing at a bit of a cost of performance. So let's check out 4K DLAA Ultra. Okay, so with DLAA, it actually didn't end up costing us all that much. I was actually kind of surprised. Instead of averaging 84 FPS, we averaged 82 FPS with DLAA. And now, one thing that I haven't yet mentioned is that this game is quite CPU bound, and that'll become more apparent when we check out DLSS. But so far, DLAA is pretty good. And as far as frame time, it's actually very good in the city. We're going to take a look at the outside as well before we wrap up the video, because there's some surprises there. Of course there is. Freaking Todd Howard. Next, I wanted to take a look at DLAA with DLSS frame generation on top before we use upscaling. This game does support DLSS frame generation, and it actually does a pretty good job. You have to use either DLAA or DLSS, though, to be able to turn on frame generation. Otherwise, you can't turn it on. That's how Bethesda's done it. But if we turn on frame generation on top of DLAA, we average 100 FPS from 82. So that's about a 25-ish% gain in FPS. I shouldn't say performance because it's not really performance, but in FPS, in fluidity. That's actually pretty good. It looks good. And yeah. That's probably the best case scenario for visual fidelity at the moment. But what about upscaling? Well, let's take a look. Alright, so next I wanted to check out upscaling. And this is 4K with DLSS quality. And yeah, here we actually averaged 111 FPS. So that is real frames, which is great. And it actually looks really good, DLSS, in this game. It does a pretty good job. You don't see any flicker or anything like that, which is actually a bit present with FSR. But that's besides the point. Now, one thing that you may have noticed here is the CPU utilization. It's gone all the way up to 71%. And we are actually hitting some CPU limitations here and there. And you're going to see this once we check out DLSS balance. The frame rate's not really going to go up that much higher, unfortunately. This game remains very CPU intensive, even in this what looks to be a much smaller city than New Atlantis, right? Alright, so now we're checking out DLSS balance. And yeah, as you can see, there isn't a big difference in FPS. As a matter of fact, we average 110, 111 with DLSS quality. With DLSS balance, we average 117 FPS. So not much more performance to be had with this CPU. Now, if I remember correctly, I think Intel, the 14900, 14700K, actually do really good in this game. So I'm actually curious to see how those would do in similar situations. Maybe some of my subscribers could show me, but I'm actually even more curious about the next part of this video, the outside, because performance isn't great. But the only other thing we could do to increase our FPS here is to throw on frame generation, because our CPU is pretty much maxed out. Our GPU utilization is dropping below 90 something percent. So let's go ahead and throw frame generation on top and see what happens. Here we go, guys. We're now testing the same exact area with DLSS balance and DLSS frame generation on top. And we actually go from 116, 117 average FPS all the way up to 160 average FPS. So a pretty big jump in total FPS with frame generation on top of DLSS balance. I would say this is the best case scenario in this particular area anyway. But what about FSR frame generation? Because in some games, FSR frame generation can actually give you even more FPS. So I just wanted to squeeze this one in as a little bonus. What I did was I ran this same exact area with FSR set to balance as well, and FSR frame generation on top. Here we go, guys. Moment of truth. We're now running FSR balance plus FSR frame generation. With DLSS balance and DLSS frame generation, we averaged 160 FPS. With FSR balance and FSR frame generation, we averaged 180 FPS. So quite a bit more frames with FSR frame generation. And I bet you if I was using the 7900 XTX, I'd probably get even more frames in relation as far as percentages, because I've noticed that AMD GPUs can actually gain a bit more frames with FSR frame generation than Nvidia ones. Now the downside, FSR balance does not look very good. There's quite a bit of flicker if you pay close attention to the finer geometry. Even FSR quality actually has a very noticeable flicker. So in that aspect, it's a downgrade, but more frames. That is very interesting. But anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at the outside real quick and then wrap this video up, because I had some issues with the open world. This is the very first time that I try a land vehicle, but I ended up going back to native 4K Ultra, and it was quite a bit stuttery, guys. So this area here, I tried it multiple times. It must be something to do with loading, because there was always a stutter once you make it past the gate there. But now, I don't know if I mentioned before, but I put over 160 hours in Starfield. When it first came out, I really got into it. I was kind of enjoying the game, exploring and all that stuff, and I had a good time. But I explored a ton of planets. I don't remember it being like this. I think that overall performance is actually pretty good. But here we're hitting some stutters here and there. Now, if we check out this same area with DLSS quality, I mean, it was pretty much the same thing. Yes, we went from averaging 80 to 100, which is great, but I still saw quite a few stutters. But also, if you're looking at the CPU utilization, we're at like 80% on the 7800X3D. So the CPU is getting blasted. I don't remember the game being, I mean, it was always CPU heavy as a game, Starfield, always. but I just don't remember it being like this. I remember it being quite smooth when you explored the open world. Now, what I also tried was DLSS quality with a 90 FPS lock. Sometimes that can result in better quality, because in a CPU-bound scenario, that can result into more stutters and hitching, so putting an FPS cap can be smoother. But as you can see here, even with a 90 FPS lock, we still get some of these, you know, little stutters here and there, which is kind of unpleasant. But there was one more thing I wanted to try that theoretically kind of made sense. So what I did was I went back to 4K with DLAA, I enabled frame generation, and then I went onto the Nvidia app and set a 100 FPS limit and enabled VSync through the driver. And as you can see, there is some hitches here and there, very small ones, but it actually felt smoother. It really did. We didn't see those big massive stutters, and if you look at the CPU utilization, actually, whereas previously it was close to 80, now it's in the 40s a lot of the time, and that kind of makes sense why there would probably be less stutters. So again, I don't know, I'm just experimenting here and sharing my findings with you guys. So yeah, the open world wasn't great in a lot of the areas that I looked at. In the more open areas, it actually wasn't bad. It was fairly smooth, like right now.
You know, I just had a memory of the first time I ate chunks. Sheer madness to see one all the way out here.
Alrighty then, so to wrap it up and share my thoughts, so I did play for a little bit longer. I carried on with the quest here, and what I ended up doing actually was I just set a 120 FPS limit because I play on a 120 Hz display anyway. I use DLSS quality, everything maxed out. DLSS looks great in this game, so why not use it, right? But I mean, there's a lot of things you can tweak. I mean, for the most part, it's pretty good, but the open world is a bit concerning to me. Now, those other problematic areas that I showed with the particles, I'm not too concerned about that because, like I said, I've played this game for over 160 hours, and this is like the first time I saw that. Now, I've heard from other people that there's other areas they've experienced similar stuff, like sitting underneath a waterfall, that type of thing. So that, I guess that kind of makes sense, but it's not something that you're going to run into a lot. What you are going to run into, though, is performance inconsistencies when you're exploring the open world. So I don't remember that being like that when I played the game, so I hope this is something to do with the expansion and Bethesda can fix it. But yeah, I mean, I wanted to take a look at a bunch of stuff for you guys and present my findings. So yeah, this is the expansion for Starfield, Shattered Space, and I do plan on completing it. I heard it's not that long. But yeah, I have a few other games that I want to take a look at. Probably be doing Throne and Liberty next because that game is live and I'm a big MMORPG fan, so I'm kind of curious. I will be checking that out. But you guys, leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think about all this. Share your experience with me, and I would like to hear it. And give the video a like if you liked it. Consider subscribing if you want to see similar content, and I appreciate you watching either way. And I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.